The subway was crowded, but Lara seemed to be living on a different frequency. The voices and footsteps around her were nothing more than distant noise. On her lap, she held a small wooden box, as light in her hands as it was heavy on her conscience. Her fingers brushed the lid as if wanting to imprint on her skin what she was about to do. The yellowish lights of the platform reflected on the walls, creating shadows that moved with each passenger that passed. The metallic smell of the tracks mixed with the sweet and nauseating perfume of someone nearby. Lara took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but her heart pounded far too loudly. The whistle of the train echoed, and the cold air that came with it made her shiver. Upon entering the carriage, she chose a seat near the window. The city rushed by outside, in smears of light and concrete, as if the world were trying to escape from the moment she herself was running to meet. She closed her eyes for a moment. The images came like a fast film. The first conversation with Noah, the way he looked at her that night in the park, the unexpected proposal. A phrase of his hammered in her memory. I want it to be special for you. But understand, nothing is free. The meaning of those words weighed heavily. Lara had never imagined herself considering something like this. Not for money, but for the man who was on the other side of this decision. And yet, the value Noah offered, not just in figures, but in everything he promised to do for her, could completely change the course of her life. She opened her eyes, staring at her own reflection in the glass. The young woman looking back seemed older, further away from the girl she had been just a few months ago. Everything that was about to happen was not a thoughtless act. It was a choice, and choices have prices. The train slowed down and entered the last station before downtown. When the doors opened, the air heavy with the smell of coffee and the city lights flooded the carriage. Lara stepped out with firm steps, though inside everything trembled. She walked through the busy streets, weaving between people and sounds, until she reached the agreed cafe. The windows were fogged, but she could see him inside. Noah was sitting in the corner, the camera hanging from his neck, slowly stirring his cup. His gaze was fixed on nothing, as if thinking about what could not be said. Lara stopped in front of the door. For a moment, she thought of turning back. But then she remembered the overdue bills, the opportunities she never had, and what this decision could mean. She knew what she was about to give, and she knew what she would get in return. She took a deep breath, opened the door, and went in. The sound of the bell announced her arrival. Noah lifted his gaze and smiled, but there was something in those eyes, a mixture of desire, urgency, and melancholy, that made her feel that night would forever mark her story. And deep down, she already knew, some first times cost much more than we are prepared to pay. Sitting at the table across from Noah, Lara kept her hands firmly wrapped around the coffee cup, as if the warmth could stop her doubts from freezing what courage she had left. He didn't say anything right away, and neither did she. The tension was like a third character there, invisible but present in every breath. As the seconds dragged on, Lara's mind drifted away from that cafe, carrying her far from that moment. Back to where everything had begun. A small apartment in the suburbs, with peeling walls and the constant smell of paint, and freshly brewed morning coffee. At 21, Lara had been living alone since she was 18, when she decided she no longer wanted to depend on a home that had never given her emotional security. Her mother, absent between one relationship and another, and her father, gone since she was 6, had left a void she filled with art. Painting was her refuge. Since childhood, she would spend hours watching colors blend on an improvised palette, sometimes jar lids, other times old plates she found in the kitchen. Her hands always carried paint stains, like colorful scars from an inner world she tried to translate. She worked part-time at a small stationery store, where, in exchange for a modest salary, she also got discounts on painting supplies. At night, she studied visual arts at a public university. Tuition was free, but the cost of living was unforgiving. Electricity, water, rent, and lately, debts that began to pile up after an important client commissioned a series of paintings and never paid. Even with hardships, Lara preserved small rituals, waking up early to see the sun break through the thin curtain, drinking strong black coffee, and listening to a playlist she called Songs for Surviving. They were calm, melancholic tracks that created a quiet inside her, even when the street outside screamed with car horns and street vendors. But behind those habits was a constant fear, the fear of never moving forward. She saw classmates already selling their work for high prices, traveling, holding exhibitions. She, on the other hand, was always on the edge, balancing life between work, studies, and dreams that seemed further away each day. It was in this state of fragility and hunger for change that Noah appeared. He emerged like a detail that refuses to go unnoticed, a man with a camera in his hand, but who seemed more interested in people than in landscapes. The first time they spoke was in a park. Lara was sitting on the grass, painting the shadow of a tree stretching across the ground. Noah, with the care of someone who doesn't want to startle, asked to see her work. And before she could answer, he had already clicked the shutter, not at the painting, but at her. "You don't realize how much you give yourself when you paint," he said, showing her the photo on his camera screen. The phrase stayed with her for days. No one had ever noticed something so intimate in such a short time. In the meetings that followed, Noah proved to be observant, curious, but never intrusive. He spoke about travels, places Lara only knew from photos, and listened intently when she talked about art. Yet, despite their growing closeness, he always seemed to be hiding a part of himself. The moment that changed everything came weeks later, in a cafe near the park where they'd met. Between sips of cappuccino and conversations about exhibitions, Noah said he wanted to propose something different, something that could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for her. At first, Lara thought he meant something to do with art, maybe sponsoring an exhibition, introducing her to a collector, or even buying one of her paintings. But as he explained, it became clear that wasn't it. It was a personal proposal, intimate, a request that mixed desire with the intention to help. He wanted to be her first. In return, he would offer something that could change the course of her life, not just money, but a concrete chance to escape the limitations that trapped her. The shock was immediate. Lara didn't know what to say. She felt anger, curiosity, shame, and a strange sense of freedom at being able to decide. It wasn't a request made on impulse. Noah spoke calmly, as if he had thought through every word. And now, here she was, sitting across from him, feeling the weight of that choice. Noah watched her in silence. His eyes didn't ask for haste, but neither did they hide urgency. There was something in the way he looked at her that made Lara feel that if she said no, it wouldn't just be the proposal she'd lose, but a door that might never open again. She glanced at the wooden box on the table. That was where she would keep what she received in return. Not the money, but an object that would represent that night. Something she could touch years later and remember not just what she had given, but what she had gained. She sighed and looked back at him. She still hadn't decided. Maybe she wouldn't decide until the last second. But she knew her life was about to change. And deep down, one question hammered at her. Was she ready to pay the price of her first time? Noah was never a man who went unnoticed. It wasn't just because of his height or his strong features, the well-groomed beard, the slightly tousled hair, the steady gaze. It was because of his presence. He carried a kind of calm that drew attention, as if he refused to be affected by the rush of the world. At 29, he had the air of someone who had lived more than he would have liked. The camera hanging around his neck was almost an extension of his body, and his fingers handled the equipment with the same ease as someone holding a cup of coffee. Noah was born in a small coastal town, but from a young age he lived in constant motion. His father was a sailor, often away for long stretches, and his mother, an art teacher, had the habit of encouraging him to capture moments. She was the one who gave him his first camera at the age of 11. A simple analog piece of equipment with which he photographed any detail. The foam of the sea, wrinkled hands holding nets, faces that told stories without uttering a word. His adolescence was marked by frequent moves from city to city, and that nomadic life ended up shaping his ability to adapt, to read people quickly, to enter and leave other people's stories without being noticed. But, at the same time, it created a void. He never stayed long enough to grow roots. When he turned 22, he began working as a freelance photographer. He traveled to more than 20 countries, documenting not only landscapes but, above all, people. His gaze sought out fragilities, and perhaps that's why he recognized Lara's so quickly. Despite his success as a photographer, Noah carried a quiet melancholy. It wasn't just the solitude of travel. There was something more. Something he didn't talk about. His closest friends, few but loyal, knew he avoided speaking about the future. He made no long-term plans, bought nothing he couldn't carry in a suitcase. The truth was that Noah had received a serious diagnosis 2 years earlier. A rare, silent condition that was advancing. Doctors had given him options. An aggressive and expensive treatment abroad with no guarantees of a cure, or simply living the time he had left as fully as possible. He told almost no one about it. When he arrived in Lara's city, it was to prepare a photography exhibition. He spent the first few days walking the streets, getting to know faces, observing local life. Until, one late afternoon, he saw a young woman painting alone in the park. She had earphones in, but seemed to be listening to another kind of music, one that played only inside her. He approached slowly. He didn't want to interrupt, but something made him click the shutter. The image captured wasn't just of her painting. It was of her surrender, her concentration, her soft, almost vulnerable expression. When he showed her the photo, he saw in her eyes a mix of surprise and discomfort, as if he had noticed something she herself didn't see. That's how it began. Small conversations, casual encounters, exchanges of messages. Noah spoke little about himself, but asked much about Lara. He liked hearing her opinions about art, about life, about dreams she barely had the courage to voice. As they grew closer, Noah began thinking about the one thing he couldn't stop thinking about: time. He didn't know how much of it he had left, but he knew he didn't want to leave behind only photographs. He wanted to leave something that marked, that would be remembered not as a goodbye, but as a transformative moment for someone. The proposal for Lara didn't come out of nowhere. He had thought about it for weeks. It wasn't a cheap seduction game. In his mind, it was an honest exchange. She would give him something unique and intimate, and he, in return, would give her the means to change her life, a considerable sum of money in contacts, so she could exhibit her work, have the space she had always wanted, and escape the spiral of limitations that suffocated her. He knew it sounded strange. He knew it could be interpreted as manipulation. But for Noah, there was something almost poetic in the idea. To turn her first time into an unforgettable moment, free of regrets, and tie it to something that would propel her future forward. Noah had no illusions either. He knew Lara could say no and never speak to him again. But he had read something in her eyes, a mixture of fear and courage, of someone who knows they need to take risky decisions to change their own destiny. Now, sitting in the cafe, watching her touch the wooden box, he wondered if she was thinking about the same dilemmas as he was. While Lara looked out the window, Noah studied every feature of her. Her hair clumsily tied back, the simple blouse, the delicate yet steady hands. He knew that for her, this choice would not be just about money or experience. It would be about crossing an inner boundary and discovering who she was after that. He, in turn, would also pay a price. Because, deep down, he knew he was getting more involved than he should. That it was no longer just about a bold proposal, but about something that made him wish time would slow down. And, even if he didn't say it out loud, Noah had already decided, if Lara accepted it, he would make that night something she would never forget. Not as a cold transaction, but as an encounter etched in memory, with all the colors, sounds, and sensations life could offer. The park was quiet that late afternoon. The sun, low on the horizon, filtered through the leaves of the trees, scattering patches of golden light across the grass. The air was gently cool, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Lara sat on a thin blanket, a small easel before her, and a modest set of brushes and paints at her side. She liked that time of day. There was no rush, no crowd, and the noises of the city reached her only as a distant murmur. Here, her world was reduced to the canvas and the colors being born under her hands. Noah was walking along one of the stone paths, taking in everything around him. The camera hung from his neck, swaying lightly with each step. He had seen Lara there before, but always from a distance. Today, however, something made him stop. For a few seconds, he just watched. She painted without realizing she was being observed. Her lips slightly parted, her brow furrowed in concentration. A strand of hair had escaped from her bun and swayed in the breeze. Noah raised his camera, adjusted the focus, and clicked. The sound of the shutter made Lara lift her eyes, startled. "Sorry," he said, smiling in a gesture of peace. "I couldn't help myself." Lara blinked, surprised, still holding the brush mid-air. "You took a picture of me?" "Yes, but if you don't like it, I'll delete it." He stepped a little closer, keeping a respectful distance. "It's just that you paint as if the world doesn't exist." She didn't know whether to take that as a compliment or an intrusion, but felt a strange warmth in her face. "Can I see it?" Noah turned the camera screen toward her. The image showed her face leaning toward the canvas, eyes focused, brush poised to touch the paint. The light of the setting sun cast a golden outline around her. "It's beautiful," Lara said, almost in a whisper, unsure if she meant the photo or the moment. "It's you," he replied simply. "And no, you don't have to thank me." She let out a short, nervous laugh. "I didn't thank you." Noah smiled, sitting down on the grass at a respectful distance. "Can I stay? I promise not to get in your way." Lara hesitated, but ended up nodding. She couldn't explain why, but there was something about him that didn't seem threatening. He had a calmness that contrasted with the urgency of the world. For a few minutes, she continued painting, feeling his gaze follow her every movement. "Are you a photographer?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Among other things," he answered. "But lately, it's what keeps me alive. Photographing people, stories, moments that won't come back." Lara bit her lip, as if considering before speaking. "And what did you see in me?" Noah tilted his head, studying her. "I saw someone who doesn't realize she's being seen, and who carries something inside, as if afraid to let the world find out." The sentence hung in the air, heavy and too intimate for a first meeting. Lara looked away to the canvas, trying to focus on her brushstrokes. But his words had already etched themselves into her mind. When the sun began to set, Noah stood. "I should go, but if you don't mind, I'd like to see you paint again." She thought about saying no, about keeping her distance. But for some reason, she said, "Maybe." He smiled again, a brief smile, and walked away down the stone path, the camera swaying from his neck. Lara watched him until he disappeared among the trees. That night, lying in bed, Lara found herself thinking about the photo, thinking about him, and, without meaning to, she began to imagine what it would be like if they met again. She didn't know it yet, but that click in the park had been the first in a series of moments that would change everything. The days following their meeting in the park were quiet, but not empty. Lara didn't receive any messages, nor did she send any. Still, the image of Noah, sitting on the grass with the camera hanging from his neck, returned to her mind often. It was as if he had left an invisible imprint, a trace that time could not erase. The second encounter was unplanned. Lara was at the stationery store where she worked when she heard the doorbell chime. Looking up, she saw Noah walk in. He wore a light-colored shirt with his sleeves rolled up and held a roll of photographic film in his hand. "Do you develop film here?" he asked, approaching the counter. "No," she replied, smiling lightly, "but I can recommend a place." As she wrote the address on a scrap of paper, she felt his gaze fixed on her. It wasn't an invasive look, but one of someone analyzing every detail as if it were part of a larger story. "Do you paint here?" he asked, pointing to the sketchpad on the counter. "Sometimes, when business is slow." She pushed the paper with the address toward him. "Here you go." He took the paper and slipped it into his pocket. "What if, instead of me leaving now, I stayed and you showed me what you've been working on?" Lara hesitated but ended up agreeing. They went through the sketchpad together, page by page, filled with doodles, studies, and unfinished paintings. He commented on each one, asked about the colors, about the story behind them. And with every answer, she was surprised by the genuine attention he gave. After that, their meetings became more frequent. Sometimes in the park, sometimes at the downtown cafe, other times at the stationery store. Noah never appeared in a predictable way, but when he did, it felt as if he brought a pause to the world with him. He spoke little about his own life, but shared stories of travels, people he'd met, places he had photographed. Lara listened as if watching a film, imagining every scene. "Don't you miss staying in one place?" she asked him one day, as they walked through the park. Noah looked ahead, as if the answer was somewhere on the path before them. Maybe. But sometimes, what keeps a person alive is precisely the movement. There was something in that sentence that Lara both understood and didn't. She, too, feared being stuck. But Noah's movement seemed to carry a different weight, as if it weren't a choice, but a necessity. Over time, intimacy built itself in subtle gestures. The way he brushed her hair aside when a strand fell over her eyes. The way he pulled out a chair for her. The way he listened without rushing her. One afternoon, Noah appeared at Lara's apartment door with a grocery bag. "You're always saying you live on coffee and crackers. That's unacceptable." He walked in, ignoring the mess of her makeshift studio, and began to cook. Lara watched from the table, laughing as he improvised with pots and seasonings. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the small space, and for the first time in a long while, she felt that someone was taking care of her. "Not used to being taken care of?" he asked, placing the plate in front of her. "No," she answered honestly, "but I think I could get used to it." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that says more than any sentence could. With each meeting, Lara felt she was getting closer to a point of no return. Noah never spoke about the future, but the present beside him felt more intense than any distant plan. And yet, a shadow lingered. Small details, a prolonged look into nothing, a deep sigh. The way he avoided certain questions indicated that there was something he wasn't saying. Lara didn't press, but she sensed that this secret, whatever it was connected to why he had approached her in the first place. It was on an especially cold night that Lara realized something was about to change. They were sitting on a park bench, talking about art exhibitions, when Noah looked at her differently. It wasn't just affection or desire. It was as if he were weighing each word before speaking it. "Lara," he began, then stopped. "Forget it. It's not time yet." She wanted to ask, but didn't. Deep down, she knew that when he decided to speak, nothing would be the same again. The cafe was almost empty that night. Outside, the streetlights cast golden circles on the damp sidewalk. Inside, the soft music blended with the distant hum of traffic. Lara slowly stirred her spoon in the cup, watching the spiral motion of the coffee, as if she could find an answer to her restlessness there. Noah arrived a few minutes later, wearing a dark coat. He always had that way of seeming both present and distant, as if part of him were somewhere else. He sat across from her, ordered a coffee without sugar, and stayed silent for a few seconds. "Tonight I need to tell you something," he finally said, his voice deeper than usual. "And I want you to listen until the end before you respond." Lara felt her body tense. "You're scaring me." "That's not my intention." He took a deep breath. "But I don't want you to think this is impulsive. I've been thinking about it for weeks." She looked at him, trying to read in his features some clue of what was coming. "You know, I'm not the kind of man who makes long-term plans." His hand played with the rim of the cup. "And you also know that," He paused, as if weighing his words. That my life is at an uncertain moment. Lara remained silent. I don't want to leave anything unfinished. And of all the things I still want to do, there's one I'd like to share with you. He looked her directly in the eyes, unwavering. I want your first time to be with me. For a moment, it felt like the air had vanished. Lara blinked, as if trying to process it. What? Her voice came out lower than she intended. Exactly what you heard. His expression wasn't teasing, but serious. I'm not talking about something impulsive, cheap, or meaningless. I'm talking about a moment that's planned, cared for, special, something you can remember without regret. Lara leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. And why? Me. Because you remind me of something I lost a long time ago, he said without hesitation. Something pure, not in the moral sense, but in the sense of being genuine. You don't pretend, you don't try to be someone else. And because I want to give you something in return, something that changes your life. She frowned. In return, Noah nodded. Yes, I want this to be a clear agreement. I will pay for it. Not just with money, though it would be an amount that could solve your immediate problems, but also with connections. With doors opened for your art, you would have the resources to exhibit, to invest in your talent. Her heart was beating fast. It was impossible not to feel a mix of shock and indignation, but also a strange curiosity. You think you can just buy this? She asked, her voice almost trembling. No, he replied firmly. I know I can't buy it. What I'm offering isn't a purchase. It's an exchange. You give me something unique, and I give you something that can change the course of your life. Lara looked away, focusing on the cup. Everything in her screamed to say no, and yet, a silent part of her wanted to understand more. Why now? She asked, still not looking at him. He took a deep breath. Because I don't know how much time I have. The words hung in the air. I have a health problem. It's not something that can be fixed with simple medication. I'm going abroad to try a treatment, but the chances aren't certain. Lara lifted her gaze, finally understanding the urgency in his eyes. And you want my first time to be a memory of you? The question came out almost as a whisper. I want it to be a beautiful moment for both of us. Something that isn't lost in time but kept, he said, pausing. I'm not asking you to rush. I just want you to think about it. The silence that followed was heavy. Lara felt the weight of his words in her body, as if each syllable were a grain of sand piling up until it became a tide impossible to hold back. She glanced at the wooden box on the table. That object had become a kind of anchor. She knew that if she accepted, she would keep there something to symbolize the night, a physical proof that it hadn't been a dream. I don't know what to say right now, she murmured. You don't have to say anything now. His voice softened. Just promise me you'll think about it. Lara nodded, but her heart already knew that if she thought about it too much, she would never be able to forget the proposal, nor the intensity with which he made it. When they left the cafe, they walked side by side, without touching. But the distance between them felt smaller than ever. Noah's apartment was on the top floor of an old building with an open view of the city. The walls were covered in photographs, faces of strangers, bustling streets, children playing, calloused hands holding flowers. Each image seemed to contain an entire story in silence. Lara stepped inside slowly, as if entering a sacred place. There was the smell of freshly brewed coffee and a faint aroma of aged wood. Noah led her to the balcony, where the soft light of late afternoon bathed the space. He set 2 cups on the small table and leaned back in his chair, looking out over the city. I want to tell you something I haven't told anyone here, he began, without looking directly at her. Something that explains the reason for my proposal, and might make you understand why I can't wait too long. Lara shifted in her chair, feeling the tension in the air. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with a rare condition in my heart. It's not something that can be fixed with simple medication. There's an experimental treatment abroad, but there are no guarantees. He let out a sigh. I traveled the world taking photographs, running from the thought that one day this would catch up with me. But I can't run anymore. She watched him, taking in every word. Why are you telling me this now? She asked, her voice low. Because you deserve to know that my proposal isn't some whim. It's a real wish, before it's too late. I don't want my last memory to be just a photograph or a place. I want it to be a person. Silence settled between them. Lara looked at his hands, noticing small stains from camera ink, fine scars, and wondered how many stories were trapped there. And, why me? She asked again, feeling her throat tighten. Noah lifted his eyes to her, this time with an intensity that made her glance away for a moment. Because you have something I've lost. Authenticity. When you're painting, you seem whole. You're not hiding. And that is rare. He stood and walked to a shelf, taking down a photograph. Returning to the table, he placed the image in front of her. It was a picture of her in the park, painting the same one he had shown her on the first day, but now printed and framed. I kept this because I knew, somehow, you'd be part of my story, he said, with a brief smile. And because, when I saw you, I realized I wanted my story to be part of yours too. Lara ran her fingers over the frame, feeling a mix of pride and discomfort. You know, you're asking me for something I can't give back, don't you? She murmured. I know, he replied, serious. And that's why I don't want it to be a burden. I want it to be a choice. She looked out over the city. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, as if the day were slowly bleeding into night. And if I say no? She asked. Noah gave a faint, sad smile. Then I'll respect it. And maybe I'll take more photos, travel a little longer. But I'll feel like I let something slip away that could have been unique. Lara took a deep breath. There was something about this man that broke down her defenses. It wasn't just about the proposal, but about what it represented. The possibility of living something that would never happen again. You're not afraid? She asked. I'm afraid of feeling nothing before I go, he said without hesitation. And I'm afraid of leaving nothing that matters. The words hung in the air, heavy. Lara realized he wasn't just talking about leaving memories for her, but about letting himself be marked by someone as well. Noah sat back down, picking up his cup of coffee. I don't want an answer now. I want you to think. Not about me, but about you. About how you'll feel when you look back. She nodded, but she knew that from that moment on, any thought of him would come with that choice. As the sun disappeared over the horizon, a cold wind swept through the balcony, making Lara shrink slightly. Noah got up, fetched a blanket, and draped it over her shoulders. The simple, almost intimate gesture brought an odd sense of safety. And for a moment, she thought that maybe it wasn't just about the price of her first time, but about the value it would have for him too. The sky was clear that night, and the city shimmered beneath a blanket of stars that mingled with the lights of the buildings. Lara walked slowly along the quieter streets, feeling the cold cut through the thin fabric of her coat. She had memorized Noah's address since the first time she visited him, but now, each step felt heavier. She stopped at his door, standing still for a few seconds. Taking a deep breath, she tried to steady her racing heart. She knocked once. The door opened slowly. Noah stood there, wearing a white shirt and black trousers. His hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his hands through it several times, and his gaze held a mix of surprise and understanding. So, he said, opening the door wider to let her in. Lara stepped inside. The apartment was more illuminated than usual. Candles flickered on the living room table, spreading a soft scent of vanilla and sandalwood. Low music played in the background, a slow jazz tune, almost imperceptible, yet perfectly in sync with the rhythm of her heart. Are you sure? Noah asked, his voice calm but heavy with anticipation. Lara nodded. I've thought a lot, and I think if I don't do this, I'll spend my life wondering what it would have been like. He approached slowly, as if afraid to break something fragile. Then tonight is about you. About making it special for you. Lara smiled faintly. though her hands trembled. "And for you too." Noah reached out his hand, and she took it. He led her to the balcony, where the city stretched out as far as the eye could see. The night breeze brushed against her face, and she felt she needed that moment to calm her mind before crossing the point of no return. "I want you to remember this," he said, gazing at the horizon, not as a transaction, but as an encounter. They returned to the living room. Noah took a small wooden box and placed it on the table. "It's for you to keep something from tonight, something only you will know the meaning of." Lara ran her fingers over the surface of the box, feeling its texture. "I think I already know what it will be." He dimmed some of the lights, leaving only the candles and the soft glow from the kitchen. The atmosphere wrapped around them like a cocoon, shutting out the rest of the world. Noah stepped closer, gently touching her face with his fingertips. "If I ever cross a line, you tell me." She nodded, feeling the warmth of his touch against her cool skin. The first kiss came slowly, as though he was learning the outline of her lips. It was unhurried, soft, but filled with a silent intention. His hand slid down to hold hers, and for a few seconds, they simply stayed that way, connected through touch, breathing in sync. Lara could smell him, a blend of fresh soap, coffee, and a hint of something woody. They moved to the bedroom. The curtains were open, letting in the gentle glow of the city lights. Noah looked at her as if trying to memorize a moment forever. He didn't speak empty words, letting his gestures say everything instead. Each movement came with a pause, as if giving her time to process what she was feeling. Lara was surprised by how her nervousness gave way to an odd sense of calm. There was no rush, no demand, only presence. As he touched her, Lara felt she wasn't just giving away something physical, but unlocking a door she had always kept closed. Noah seemed to understand that, and he took care with every detail, as someone who knows they're handling something precious. At times, she closed her eyes and let the sensations turn into images in her mind, warm colors, soft lights, like a living painting. When the silence of early morning began to settle over the city, they lay side by side, the candles still burning. Lara rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the steady, measured beat of Noah's heart. "I want you to know," he said, running his fingers through her hair, "that this doesn't change who you are, it doesn't define you. But for me, it will be the most beautiful memory I take from here." Lara didn't answer immediately. She just closed her eyes, etching into her memory the warmth of the moment, the scent of the room, the distant sound of the city, and the light weight of his hand over hers. Before falling asleep, she thought that perhaps the price of her first time wasn't something that could be measured only in money or promises, but in the intensity of what she had lived that night. The first light of morning slipped through the open curtains, tinting the room with a pale golden hue. The distant sound of a car passing on the street was what woke Lara. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she felt Noah's warmth beside her, his arm resting gently around her waist, and everything came back. They remained silent for a few minutes, simply breathing together. Lara knew that peace was fragile, like glass on the verge of cracking. "Sleep well?" Noah asked, his voice hoarse from sleep. "Yes," she replied, turning to face him. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "Better than I have in a long time." There was a strange atmosphere in the air, not discomfort, not regret, but a quiet awareness that they were living a moment that would not be repeated. Lara got up and walked to the balcony. The fresh morning air sent a shiver across her skin. She looked out at the city, so alive and hurried, and felt as if she were in a parallel world, one where time had slowed down. Noah appeared right behind her, handing her a mug of coffee. "I think I'm going to miss this view," he said, gazing at the horizon. "When are you leaving?" Lara asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Tomorrow morning." He took a sip of his own coffee. "I have to arrive early to start the tests." Her heart tightened. "Tomorrow? So soon?" They went back inside. On the table, the small wooden box was still there, closed. Noah stepped forward, placed his hand on it, and with a serious look, said, I want you to keep something of mine in here." He opened the box and placed inside a photograph, the same one he had taken of her in the park, the first time they met. Next to the photo, he added a card with a phone number and an email address. "In case I ever come back. Or even if I don't, this is for you to remember that you mattered to me." Lara felt her eyes well up, but she blinked to hold back the tears. "And if I want to write to you, then write," he said with a smile. "Even if I can't reply, I'll read it." They spent the rest of the morning together, talking about simple things, music, travel, small details of daily life. It was as if neither of them wanted to touch directly on the subject of his departure. But time didn't stop. When the clock struck noon, Noah stood up. He grabbed his jacket, his camera, and a small suitcase that was already waiting by the door. "I can take you to the station," Lara offered. He shook his head with a gentle gesture. "I'd rather our goodbye be here." They stood facing each other for a few seconds. Noah pulled her into a tight, lingering embrace, as if he wanted to etch her touch into his memory. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "for trusting me, for letting me be a part of you." Lara swallowed hard. "And thank you, for making me feel like I matter." When he let her go, he gave one last smile, opened the door, and left. Lara stood still, listening to the sound of his footsteps down the hallway until they faded completely. She went back to the living room, sat at the table, and opened the wooden box. There was the photo, the card, and the weight of a night that would never be forgotten. She ran her fingers over the image, remembering the sound of the camera that day in the park, then closed the box carefully. Outside, life went on. But for Lara, something had changed forever. 3 months had passed since that morning when Noah left. Lara carried on with her life as best she could, working at the stationery shop, painting whenever she found the time, and trying not to get lost in memories. But on certain nights, the memory of that night would return with force, bringing back the warmth, the calm, and the quiet weight of words left unspoken. The wooden box remained on the highest shelf of her small studio, like a secret kept among brushes and jars of paint. Lara rarely opened it, but when she did, it was as if she could once again smell the soft scent of vanilla and sandalwood from his apartment. One Saturday afternoon, the postman knocked at her door. He handed her a plain envelope, with no return address. The paper bore the marks of having traveled far. Her heart sped up. She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter and a photograph. "Lara, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't come back. Maybe the treatment was harder than I imagined, or maybe time simply decided it was time. I want you to know that, in all the places I've photographed, no moment marked me as deeply as that night with you. Not because it was your first time, but because it was my last first time, and that is priceless. I don't know how you will remember me, but I hope it's with a smile. Don't cry for what we didn't have time to live. Smile for what we did. You gave me more than you can imagine. You gave me the feeling of being alive when I already believed I had nothing left to feel. Keep the photo I'm sending. It's the last one I took before leaving for the hospital. I made sure to have it developed so you would have something new from me. Some first times cost more than we are prepared to pay, but they're worth every second. With affection, Noah." Lara stood still, holding the paper in trembling hands. Then she looked at the photograph. It was her, sitting in the park, painting at sunset. But this time, Noah was in the image, reflected in the glass of a kiosk in the background, looking at her with the same intense gaze she had met on the first day. The tears came without warning. She sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, hugging the letter and the photo. It wasn't pure sadness, there was gratitude, pride, and a strange peace. That night, Lara opened the wooden box and placed the new photograph beside the first. Then she closed the lid and stared at it for a few minutes, as if she could somehow speak to Noah through the object. Life would go on. She knew that. But she also knew that chapter would never be lost to memory. It was part of her now. When she returned to the easel, she began painting a different scene: a bench in the park, a blank canvas, and in the background, the silhouette of a man holding a camera. She smiled through her tears. Some stories don't have to last forever to be eternal. Some stories arrive without warning, change the course of our days, and remind us that time is more fragile than we think. What Lara experienced with Noah was not just about giving or choosing. It was about recognizing the value of a unique moment and making it part of who we are. If you've made it this far, thank you for surrendering to this story with us. Every view, every comment, every person who feels and is moved by what we tell, keeps the purpose of lasting tales alive, creating narratives that touch the heart deeply. If this story spoke to you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. Now, tell me in the comments, have you ever lived a moment that you knew, from the very beginning, would never be repeated? I truly want to read and talk with you about it. I read them all. And when you finish, don't leave without watching the next story we've prepared. I'm sure it will also leave a deep mark on you. Here at Lasting Tales, every story leaves marks that time cannot erase. See you in the next one.